On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview Kansas BYU. Jayhawks really need this one.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you, Everydayers. Catching all our episodes. Thank you for making it your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts or on our YouTube page. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're previewing Kansas at BYU. Jayhawks coming off that bad loss at Utah. I mean, this is kind of a season-defining game for KU. Then again, feels like we keep having these season-defining games, and that's not a bad sign that you keep having to have that kind of happen. Anyway, we're getting into the headlines of the game. KU barely hanging on ranked. Opponent scouting report of the Cougars. Keys to the game for the Jayhawks and players to watch. Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And certainly I know there's a lot of KU fans that have already been interested that BYU is only giving up 1.5 against Kansas. I know a lot of people are feel good about one side of the equation there, and I will leave that up to you to decide which one you think that is. Okay, headlines coming into this one for KU and BYU. Obviously a Tuesday late night game in Mountain Time. Can Kansas bounce back and find a way to win on the road from whatever that was on Saturday? Because you keep having these moments, as I alluded to, where it's like, okay, you lose this bad second half against Baylor, and you come out and you beat Iowa State, where it's like, okay, you need to show something here, and you did against Iowa State, but then you can't show something on the following Saturday. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's they can't play on the road, which they continue to struggle at. I think 6-13 on the road in the Hunter Dickinson era. I don't know if it's right now they just can't play on Saturdays. Like, it feels like the weekday games have gone better, so maybe that's a good sign for tonight. I guess we'll figure out if it's a road thing or a weekday thing here in this one. But you add to it that BYU is a good opponent, and you add to it that you're talking about the second game of this mountain trip, to where, you know, that time in between, like, is this going to be a good thing or a bad thing for KU that you've hung out kind of in the Utah area? Are you going to be more adjusted? Are you going to be more ready for the altitude and how that can affect you coming into this game? Or is it going to be, you know, you were already lacking for energy. Now you're coming off a game in Mountain Time. Your body isn't recovering like it normally is when it's not at altitude, and you're going to be even less lethargic, if that's even possible, for this Kansas team right now. I don't know. That's going to be interesting. Now, Kansas did come in 23rd in the latest AP poll, so they keep their ranked streak alive. I mean, it's not nearly as long of a ranked streak as when they last snapped it back in 2021, when it was dating back to 2009 for the ranked streak to keep going. But, you know, it obviously does raise alarm bells anytime Kansas is not ranked. And if you lose this game, if you lose either of these next two games this week, you're going to be unranked next week. I feel confident in saying that. So from that standpoint, you know, you want to avoid negative history. This team has already had the bad history of losing your conference opener for the first time in over 30 seasons, right? I don't know how confident people are that the senior day streak is going to continue at home against Arizona, but we can get to that down the road. The other part of this, does a win at Provo make you start believing again? You know, because I feel like probably not, because of the standpoint of how inconsistent it's been all season long, and because the Utah loss is probably going to be worse than even if you do get a win here at BYU. So I don't think it's going to cause people to believe. But at the same point in time, there are people that are going to keep the hope going, and that's part of fandom, right? That you hold on to that ever inkling of hope. And so if you can win this game, of course, there's going to be some people that, you know, start believing again in this team. But I think beyond all of that, we just had Graham Doran on yesterday's episode, and thank you to Everydayers catching that. If you haven't, check it out, because it talks a lot about the potential seeding that Kansas could get based on how they finished the season, kind of the best case and worst case scenario. And this game is very important to figuring out what Kansas is going to be, right? If you lose this game, you might be talking about this team being a 6 or 7 seed, right? If you win this game, maybe you can get back on track and you know, you go 2-1 in that final 3-game stretch, which is going to be pretty tough. And maybe you can start talking about yourself being back in that top 4 seed scenario. And if you can win this game and go on a hot streak, maybe you can work yourself back up to a 3 seed or something like that. So you look at the importance of this one on the NCAA tournament seeding, but you also look at this one, the importance of the Big 12 tournament seeding. Right now, you're outside 2 games of the top 4 seed, which is the ones that get the bye in the first week. I mean, that is crazy that Kansas, they expanded the Big 12 tournament, and now, you know, with the new schools being added in and everything, to where now it's no longer 10 teams in the tournament. And basically you are in a situation where you're probably going to be playing on a Wednesday back-to-back years in the Big 12 tournament, which is nuts for so long. Kansas would be, the 1 or the 2 seed. BYU scouting report, they come in with a very similar record. They're also 17-8. They're also 8-6 in Big 12 play. So they have the same record as Kansas. And that also means the importance of the seeding in this one, that if you lose this game, you're going to be looking at possibly a 6 or 7 seed in the Big 12 tournament, maybe lower depending on how you finish the season, right? So you look at BYU, they just beat Kansas State handedly on Saturday by 15 points. That's a really impressive win for the Cougars because Kansas State's been playing as good of basketball as anyone in the conference. And overall, BYU has won 6 of their last 8 games. They're ranked right around the top 30 on KenPom at this point in time. Kind of a bubble team for my money. They should be an NCAA tournament team. And this is also, one of the tougher places to play in the Big 12. So this becomes a very difficult game. It becomes a difficult game because it's a solid opponent. It's a difficult place to play. And it's also a difficult game because I don't think this is a good stylistic matchup for KU. And we saw that a little bit last year when BYU came in Allen Fieldhouse and pulled off the victory. Let's get into why here in a second. So you look at the personnel for BYU. It's a very weird, normally when you say, okay, is this team big? Do they have a lot of height? You're referring to their big men. You're referring to, they have a 6'9" 3-man at the wing, and they have a 6'11" 4-man, and they have a 7-footer at the 5. And you look at it, BYU's 23rd in the country in average height, according to KenPom. But they don't do it the normal way. It's almost like inverted. Their centers, the 2 main ones they play, are 6'8" and 6'6". But the difference is their point guard, Egor Demin, is 6'9", and the other guards that they're playing at the 2 and the 3 and even the 1 are 6'4", 6'5". They have 6'7" and 6'9" wings. So it's a very interesting roster and how it kind of comes together, and that makes it difficult because Kansas has a lot of small guards, and they're going to have the size advantage with the guards. But then Kansas can have the advantage with the size of the bigs, but BYU is able to space you out. And we've seen Kansas struggle with teams who can, pace the court or space the court and, shoot threes really well. So you look at them, 6'9" freshman point guard, Egor Demin, probably a lottery pick, 11 points, 5.5 assists per game. He's an even better passer than those assist numbers show. Really good passer. 3.6 rebounds, 1.2 steals. Has been inconsistent shooting the ball. So it'll be interesting to see how Kansas defends him. 28% from 3, but a really good player overall. Dallin Hall is just kind of your commanding point guard, 35% from 3, good facilitator. So both those guys will get time, running the point. Trevin Knell is one of the best shooters in the conference, 42% from 3 for his career, over 500 three-point attempts at 39%. He's a 6'5" guard. They have Dawson Baker, who's a 6'4" guard, scores about 8 a game, 38% from 3. You'll see the theme, a lot of, good three-point shooters here for BYU. 6'5" wing Richie Saunders. He's been their leading scorer this season, 15 points per game, also 4.5 rebounds, but his shooting percentage is very good. 50% from the field, 42% from 3, 77 at the foul line, and he's had 20 or more points 5 times in Big 12 play. Then among the wing spots, at the 3 and the 4, they'll use, I don't know the proper pronunciation, Maywat Mag. He's a 6'7" wing, 50% from the floor, 34% from 3 off the bench. Even if you're lower percentage shooting players are shooting 34%, that's a good place to be. And then Cannon Catchings is a really interesting player, 6'9" freshman. I think he's going to be a really good player down the road here. Lengthy wing, 8.2 points per game on 35% from 3, so he can shoot a little bit, he can score a little bit. Doesn't really do much else in the stat sheet, but he has been a strong defender according to some of the metric numbers. So if you're talking about basically kind of a 3-and-D 6'9" freshman wing, he's probably going to turn into something pretty good down the road, but he's been a very useful piece for them. And then at center is a rotation of a 6'8", 231-pound center in Kiba Keita. He's mostly a rebounder, 7.6 rebounds per game, 63%. He'll shoot it when he gets open. But, good, very good defender on the inside, good rebounder. And then Fousseyni Traore, who is the bowling ball big man, 6'6", 240 pounds, 8.8 points, 5.7 rebounds, better scorer than Keita. I think Keita is definitely the better defender, though. But Traore is difficult because he is that bowling ball. He will charge into you 63%. But he also, when he gets fouled, which when you have a guy that big who's good at using his momentum and mass, he's going to go to the free throw line, and he's shooting them at 82%. Then they might use a little bit of their 6'10", who kind of a stretch 5, and Mihailo Boskovic. Now, what they do well, this is a top 15 offense in the country. They are 3rd in offensive efficiency in Big 12 only games. By the way, I should probably mention, Kansas is only 2-4 this season when they play teams with top 20 offenses on Ken Palm's adjusted offensive efficiency. So that would be good for BYU there. But BYU is top 10 in effective field goal percentage and 2-point percentage in the country. They don't take like a super high volume of twos, but the reason why they're so good there is because they really space you out from 3-point range. And so they really open up driving lanes. They open up cutting lanes. A lot of times you put all this emphasis on guarding the three, and then boom, they get a wide open layup as part of it. But they're also top 20 in 3-point rate in the country, 36.5% from three, which when you're shooting on that volume becomes very impressive and difficult to stop. They're a good passing team. They're solid offensive rebounding unit too, right? A lot of those long shots, you're getting offensive rebounds. Defensively, this is an elite defensive rebounding unit too. So they're doing a good job there. And they do a good job of avoiding sending teams to the free throw line. Now, where they've struggled, this is a BYU team that's turned the ball over too much on the offensive end of the court, which is a little weird because you would think a team that's shooting a lot of threes, a lot of times the tighter passes are the ones where you're driving and kicking or driving and trying to find somebody in a tight window or throwing a post up that somebody's getting fronted. And a lot of times those can lead to more turnovers. Usually the teams that shoot a lot of threes turn it over less because you're just on the exterior and shooting it or passing it around the horn, which, is a higher percentage passion. But they have struggled a little bit with the turnovers. They don't shoot many free throws. And oddly enough, as good of a 3-point shooting team as they are, they haven't been a good free throw shooting team, weirdly enough. But they rank outside the top 70 on defense. So this is, even though it's been, one of the better offenses in the league, it has been one of the worst defenses in the league. In Big 12 only games, they are 12th of the 16 teams in defensive efficiency. And the reason why, they've kind of been hurt from 3-point range. And then they're kind of middle of the pack from 2 on defense and on turnover defense and forcing them or kind of a lack thereof. So we'll see how that impacts the game. Let's get to our keys to the game for Kansas. Players to watch next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Episode of the show today is brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from a sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed. And while you go about your day, no stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Continuing on in this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode. And we will have a KU BYU postcast after the game. It'll be a late one, so you might tune in on Wednesday morning. You might tune in after the game, Tuesday night, whatever. We appreciate you joining us. Okay, keys to the game for KU. Number 1, play with energy and poise. And this was a key I had for the Utah game, and honestly, I think I've had it a couple other games too. But it's a pertinent one because, well, okay, first of all, I could just make this key number 1 for every game for Kansas moving forward. Because when this team does play with energy for a long period of time, I'm not saying they're the best team in the country, but they're a better team. And yes, there are more problems. Even if this team does play with energy, they can still lose. They still do have problems, right? They're still not the best offense in the world, even if they play with energy. They still don't have the most spacing in the world, even if they don't play with energy. They still don't, are and haven't figured out getting some of the transfers accustomed to playing Bill Self basketball. Some of that stuff, maybe it doesn't change without the lack of energy. But here's the thing. Whatever version of yourself you are, what do you think is the better version? The one that's trying hard and going all out, or the one that's not? Whether you think Kansas is a poorly fitting team or a bad team or a good team or a mid team, or wherever you think they are on that scale, ask yourself the question. Do you think they would be a worse team or do you think they would be a better team? Excuse me. Do you think they would be a better team if they played like junkyard dogs? The answer is absolutely yes. Now, where that ceiling would be remains to be, right? Is it the difference between Kansas being, a top 30 team in the country to being a top 15 team in the country? Is it the difference between being a top 20 team in the country and a top 10 team in the country? Is the difference between being the 16th best team and the 14th best team? I don't know, but you're better if you play with that energy, right? You just are. And for a Kansas team that isn't that good on offense, don't you think the identity would need to be being junkyard dogs, winning all these small margins, and being a good defensive team? Because at this point, it's pretty clear the offensive talent just isn't there for this team based on the personnel they're playing, right? And if that's the case, you need to steer into the energy thing, because there is no way, if you're going to be the lesser talented offensive team in a lot of these games, like against BYU, you have to find other ways to win. And part of that is the energy thing. So that's part of it. But the other, like, you see this in the way KU defends too, right? You think of the Utah game, how many of those threes, guys, I think Utah had, 8 in the first half? How many of those were just wide open shots because KU wasn't rotating hard enough? They weren't hustling fast enough. They weren't. And part of it is both mental energy and physical energy, right? Sometimes you can run all out, but if mentally you're not there, don't know where you're going, it's not going to help either. So you need to be there and play with that poise on the road here. BYU ranks in the 98th percentile for the percentage of their shots that come from the corner during conference play. So you've got to be able to get out on those shooters, right? And for the season, BYU is shooting corner threes at a 44% clip. That is in the 97th percentile nationally. So you have to be able to get out on these shooters. They shoot them from everywhere. They'll shoot them from deep. They have a bunch of different guys who can take it. Everybody better be on their game for KU and play with energy. Number 2, hold on to the ball if you're Kansas. BYU, as we mentioned, not a great turnover defense. They're 13th in Big 12 only games in turnover rate on the defensive end of the court. So, again, they're not forcing them a ton, but when they do, they become pretty deadly because they do a lot of other things well, that when they start forcing these as well, it becomes very difficult to beat them. When BYU forces an 18% or higher turnover rate, and for comparison, on the season, they're at 16.3. So this is playing, for them, a good game in terms of forcing turnovers. They're 11-0 when they force an 18% or higher turnover rate. You might be doing the math. Okay, the record's 17-8. That means they're 6-8 on the flip side when they don't. For Kansas, they're 5-4 this season when they turn the ball over 18% or higher, compared to 12-4 when it's under. So, it's not as divisive a split as BYU, but it still is a difference in the split there for Kansas. And unfortunately, here's where the road game comes into time. And this is something where you would think, Kansas being the most experienced team in the country, this stuff wouldn't phase them, but it clearly does. Playing on the road clearly phases this team and this core of players, because in 4 of Kansas's last 5 road games, they have been at 18% or higher on that turnover rate, the magic number here that we're kind of alluding to. So can you avoid it tonight against BYU becomes a big question. Number 3, get Hunter Dickinson going. He was just 4 for 12 in the game at Utah. And did you know that the last time Hunter Dickinson had a double-double was January 11th? This dude was a double-double machine. I don't know. I would have thought it would have been sooner than, 5 weeks ago. And that was against Cincinnati. Now this one's a little bit of a higher bar, 20 points and 10 rebounds. That's a very good game, but he hasn't had a 20 and 10 game, which I don't know. Again, it feels like we would see those semi-regularly since the NC State game, which you have to go back all the way to December 14th. So it's been over 2 months since we've seen a 20 and 10 game from, 20 points and 10 plus rebounds from Hunter Dickinson. He had 9 games a season ago. So, if you think about it, basically 1 in every 4 of KU's games last year, he was getting a 20 and 10 game. We haven't seen one in over 2 months for this Kansas team. And Kansas doesn't have enough offensive options right now, right? The AJ Storr, Rylan Griffen thing just hasn't really worked out for differing reasons, which we don't need to get into right now. But because of those things, and because of the fact that Zeke Mayo might be questionable for this game, right? Regardless if Zeke Mayo plays or not, we do know that Zeke has struggled a bit more on the road, and if he does play, he's going to be probably playing through an injury at that point in time. But regardless if he does or not, you still need another offensive presence. And for Kansas to win a game when they're not a particularly great offensive team, you need Hunter Dickinson to kind of carry the offense. You just do. And, it's tough for him because the spacing isn't always there and stuff. But you look at what happened in the Utah game, that wasn't about the lack of spacing, in my opinion. Sure, did it make it a little bit harder? Yeah. But there were shots he was missing that he normally makes, and you have to make those in this game against BYU. In wins, Hunter Dickinson is averaging 17.6 points per game on 55% shooting. In losses, Hunter Dickinson is averaging 13.9 points per game, so almost 4 less per game. He's averaging less rebounds, less assists, less steals, less blocks, more turnovers, more fouls in the losses, and he's shooting, instead of 55% in wins, he's shooting 46%. You can see there's a clear difference there. And the good news is Dickinson does have a nice size advantage. I'm definitely worried about him getting exposed defensively with the way that BYU plays and spaces the floor on the offensive end. But that just means to me he has to be a focal point of the offense, right? Because the way I view it is it's almost like it's a matchup of, hey, this is our strength. You might have trouble defending it. And this is your strength. We're going to have trouble defending it. And so you just need to emphasize your strength and hope that you can do a good enough job against theirs. Let's get to our players to watch. And who's high on the go-off meter for KU? That on the other side. Thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. Again, we'll have a postcast episode. Later this week, we're going to rank which KU basketball players most need back, or Bill Self needs the most get back to surround Darren Peterson in 2025 to 2026. So we're going to take a look at the guys who can come back and where they would rank in terms of needing them to come back to try to be the most successful team you can next season. Okay, players to watch for KU in this one. The matchup for me, I'm going to go with who guards Egor Demin. Because I think it's going to be really easy. He's a 6'9" point guard. Are you going to really put DeJuan Harris on him? Maybe in your mind, you're thinking, okay, even though this guy's way bigger than DeJuan and that might scare us on drives or if they post him up or something like that, or that he can get shots off over him and stuff. Maybe you also view it from like, well, DeJuan can just be a pest and, poke the ball free, maybe if the dribble's high or something. I don't know. That could be one interesting thing that they could do. I actually kind of want to see KJ Adams defend him. Right? I think this would be great. You put 6'7" versatile KJ Adams on Egor Demin. And, even though I do think KJ has been a very good defender this year for KU, probably KU's best defender this season, the one area that sometimes you might notice when KJ gets scored on, it's when he's matched up against a guard who can shoot threes and can operate off ball and get open there. Well, with Denim, he's a 28% three-point shooter, and he's the guy with the ball in his hand most of the time. So I would like to say KJ Adams on him, and then that would kind of put, I guess you put DeJuan Harris on their 2 or 3, and you kind of figure it out from there down the line. So I'll be interested to see what they do, though, but to me, that would be where I'd be pointing to. Now, I guess beyond that, Richie Saunders versus whoever the KU 3-man is in this game, that could be problematic on the defensive end for KU. Can whoever it is for Kansas step up and match it on offense, right? So that could be, if Zeke Mayo does play, that could be Zeke Mayo at the 3. He's struggled a bit at times on the defensive end. Can he find a way to match up? Or if Zeke doesn't play, what does that mean for the lineups for KU? Does that mean you get, more of Rylan, Griffen, or AJ Stewart at the 3 where you're matching up with Saunders? Does it mean we see more of the 3 big basketball where KJ's in at the 3 playing next to Flory and Hunter? Do we see, more of Shaquille Moore? Like, who ends up being that guy for KU? And then can you try to make him work at least on the defensive end when you're on offense? Now, high on the go-off meter, when you look at it, over a third of the shots that have come against BYU this season have been above the break threes. By pure total, we'll round up here just to make it a round even number. They're basically giving up 20 3-point attempts per game that are above the break. That puts them in the 11th percentile for preventing them. So point being, they're giving up one of the highest totals of above the break threes in the country. Well, teams have shot a 34% clip against them there, so fine, but, nothing excellent. But they'll be there, point being. Well, in Big 12 games, Zeke Mayo is taking 4.8 of those 3-point attempts per game. He's shooting them at a 43% clip. So, in theory, you would think this would be a good game for Zeke Mayo. But is he going to go? And even if he does, there has been the home road splits. And also, again, if he does play, how does playing through an injury possibly, if it is bothering him, how does that affect him, right? So that becomes a question. Well, who's second on the team for Kansas in above the break threes? That would be one Coit in 3-point attempts above the break. But here's the problem. He's only shooting them 26% in Big 12 play on above the break threes. Now, last season, he did shoot them 33%, which obviously lower level and everything, but maybe that means that there's at least a little bit of a reversion to the mean coming, and Coit's going to have a game where he goes, 3 of 4 on above the break threes to kind of equal that out. The guy third on there is Rylan Griffen for what it's worth, but I don't know. It feels like right now with Rylan Griffen, you don't know where he's going to sit in the rotation with Bill Self. So I think I'm just going to play it safe right here. I think I'm going to play it safe, and I'm just going to wind up with going with the size matchup and the bounce back matchup too for Hunter Dickinson, right? The beauty of Hunter is he's usually very consistent with his production. And so if he has a bad game like he did against Utah, I think you can most often count on him to bounce back. It doesn't always work that way, and I haven't always liked how he's performed in some of these road games for KU, but I don't really know what the other option would be. And when you look at Traore, when he's out on the court, he ranks only in the 8th percentile, so that's not very good, in DRAPM. That's basically that CBB Analytics defensive, all-encompassing rating. And then Boscovich, their other, center, has a negative rating there. Now, Keita, who plays 20 minutes per game at the center position too, he has been a really good defender so far this season, but he's also 6'8", facing a 7'2" center. So I think Hunter Dickinson can have a good game. And like I said earlier, he kind of has to, because you're going to be giving up some stuff on when you're on defense to their offense because they can space the floor when you have Hunter Dickinson out there. But at the same point in time, you need to be able to take advantage when you're on offense. Like I think back to that first half of the KU Gonzaga game. I know that didn't end well for KU, but in the NCAA tournament last year, try to forget the second half. First half was a back and forth game. Both teams were scoring high numbers. The reason why was Hunter Dickinson was taking advantage of his matchup on the offensive end, and then Gonzaga was taking advantage of him on the defensive end. Can you find a way to do that, but maybe with a few more stops in there if you're Kansas? All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back at you next time for another edition of LOJ. See you then for KU BYU Postcast.